It was a peaceful afternoon in a quiet neighborhood, where the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The sun shone gently, casting long shadows across the paved streets. On this ordinary day, two men were walking side by side down the road, seemingly unaware of the attention they were about to draw. These two men, though dressed in casual clothing, were far from ordinary. They were, in fact, two of the most well-known action stars in Hollywood, Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris. However, in this quiet neighborhood, they were not recognized. They were just two older men walking down the street, and no one had any idea who they truly were. They looked nothing like the action heroes the world had come to know. No flashy costumes, no martial arts poses, just regular people out for a stroll. Steven Seagal, with his long, dark hair tied back into a ponytail, looked calm and collected, as always. He was dressed in a simple black jacket, jeans, and a pair of sneakers. His face was serious, with the same intensity that made him a feared figure in movies. Beside him walked Chuck Norris, who looked a little older but just as tough. His short, silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a comfortable shirt and jeans, a look that could have been mistaken for that of an average retiree enjoying his day. Both men had spent their lives perfecting their craft, but today they were simply enjoying a moment of peace. However, their calm walk would soon be interrupted by a passing police patrol car. The officers inside had no idea who the two men were. They only saw two older men, walking down the street, looking a little out of place. In a quiet neighborhood like this, it wasn't unusual to see people out walking, but something about these two men caught the officers' attention. Perhaps it was the way they walked, or the fact that they didn't seem to be going anywhere in particular. Whatever it was, the officers decided to stop and question them. As the patrol car slowed down, the two men didn't show any signs of worry. Seagal and Norris had faced many dangerous situations in their lives, but a simple conversation with the police was not something that would make them flinch. They both knew the importance of staying calm and composed, regardless of the situation. Still, neither expected to be questioned in such a manner. The police car stopped next to them, and the officers rolled down the window. "Hey, you two," one of the officers called out. "What are you doing here?" Seagal and Norris exchanged a quick glance. They didn't know exactly what the rest of the afternoon passed by in a peaceful, almost surreal way. After the encounter with the teenagers, Seagal and Norris decided to sit down at a local cafe. They found a quiet spot on the patio, where they could eat. As the evening progressed, Seagal and Norris continued their walk through the quiet streets, enjoying the cool breeze and the peaceful end to what had turned out to be a very unusual day. The sun had almost fully set, and the soft glow of streetlights added a warm touch to the surroundings. The world around them seemed calm, almost as though it was slowing down, just like they had. The incident with the police, the fans, and the strange mix of confusion and amusement had faded into the background, replaced by a more reflective mood. The two of them had been in the public eye for so long, and yet, moments like this simple, unremarkable moments felt the most meaningful. It wasn't the fame, the recognition, or the adoration that mattered, it was the connection with people, the understanding, and the shared experiences that truly counted. "Do you ever get tired of the whole celebrity thing?" Norris asked as they continued to stroll side by side, hands casually in their pockets. Seagal thought for a moment before answering. "I used to. When I was younger, I didn't quite understand what it all meant. But now, I realize it's not about the fame. It's about the impact. Sure, the spotlight is nice, but it's the people you meet, the lives you touch, that matter more. That's what keeps me going." Norris nodded, agreeing with his old friend's perspective. "I've had my share of moments where I felt overwhelmed by it all. It's easy to get caught up in the glamour, the red carpets, and the fame. But the real joy is in the small things, like today. Just talking to people, hearing their stories, and knowing that maybe something you said or did made a difference in their lives. That's what makes it all worth it." They paused for a moment at a nearby park, the sound of leaves rustling in the trees adding to the peaceful atmosphere. Both of them had achieved so much in their careers: iconic roles, legendary status, and a lasting impact on martial arts and popular culture. But now, standing there, they realized that the true measure of their success wasn't in their awards or accolades. It was in the way they had lived their lives, the way they had treated others, and the lasting relationships they had built along the way. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Seagal asked, looking out at the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight were fading away. Norris thought for a moment. "I do. It's funny. When you're younger, you think there's always more to achieve. But the older you get, the more you realize that the next step is really about giving back. I've spent my whole life teaching martial arts, inspiring people through movies, but now I want to focus more on sharing what I've learned, helping others grow, just like we did." Seagal smiled at this. "Exactly. It's not about chasing the next big project or the next big role. It's about passing on the knowledge. About teaching the next generation. We've both been given a platform, a voice, and a chance to make an impact. Now it's time to help others find their own path." Both men had spent years teaching martial arts and self-discipline to countless individuals, but now they were turning their focus to something deeper. They were looking for ways to connect with others on a more personal level, to share the wisdom they had accumulated over the years, not just in the world of fighting, but in life itself. "We've been given so much," Norris continued, "so it only makes sense to give something back. Not just in the form of a punch or a roundhouse kick, but in the way we live, the way we treat others. That's the legacy we leave behind." Seagal nodded in agreement. "It's easy to get caught up in the fame, the films, the fame. But the real legacy isn't in the movies we made or the things we did on screen. It's in the lives we touched, the lessons we shared, and the people who found strength in what we've done." The two of them walked on, their pace slowing as they approached the end of the park. It was a simple evening, but there was a sense of satisfaction that came from knowing they had done their part. They had entertained millions, inspired countless individuals, and had shared their wisdom with the world. But the most important thing was the feeling they had now: a sense of peace, of quiet fulfillment. As they left the park and made their way down the street, they didn't talk much. There wasn't a need to. The day had already given them plenty to think about. They had learned something about themselves, about the nature of fame, and about the importance of staying grounded. Even after all these years, they had never lost sight of what truly mattered. When they finally reached the spot where they had begun their walk earlier, they stopped, both of them pausing to take in the quiet surroundings one last time. It felt like the world had paused just for them, offering them a moment of reflection before they went on with their lives. "I think this was good for us," Seagal said, glancing over at Norris. "It was," Norris agreed. "We've had our share of crazy moments, but this one, it was a reminder. A reminder that life isn't about all the noise. It's about the simple moments. The ones we don't often notice." Seagal smiled. "Exactly. It's about staying grounded, remembering who we really are, and what we really stand for." They exchanged a quiet nod, the understanding between them clear. They had both learned a lot over the years, but today had given them something more important: peace. They had seen the world through a different lens, one that didn't focus on the bright lights or the fame. Instead, they had focused on the little things: the moments of quiet, the conversations with people, the opportunity to reflect and find meaning in the simplest aspects of life. As they turned to walk home, neither of them rushed. They walked at their own pace, content with the day that had unfolded, and knowing that whatever came next in their lives, they were ready. They had lived through the highs and lows, the challenges and victories, and they were now more at peace with themselves than ever before. They may have been legends in the eyes of many, but to each other, they were just two old friends walking through life, enjoying the quiet moments and knowing that, in the end, that was all that really mattered. Enjoy the calm atmosphere of the street around them. The noise of the world seemed far away, and the only sounds were the soft clinking of coffee cups and the occasional car passing by. As they sipped their drinks, they reflected on the strange chain of events that had unfolded earlier that day. The police incident, the initial confusion, and then the encounter with the fans. It had all felt like something out of one of their own action movies. But instead of the usual dramatic fight scenes or high-speed chases, the day had been marked by simple moments of connection and understanding. "It's funny," Norris said, breaking the silence. "You'd think after all these years, we'd be used to the fame, the attention, and the recognition. But then something like this happens, and it reminds you that we're just regular people too." Seagal nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We've spent so many years in the spotlight, doing what we do best. But at the end of the day, we're just two guys trying to live a quiet life. And sometimes, it's nice to be reminded of that." For both men, the simplicity of the moment was refreshing. They had spent so much of their lives in the whirlwind of fame and public appearances, and even though they still had devoted fans and admirers, moments like these, quiet and peaceful, were becoming rarer. In many ways, it felt like the world had moved on from their action hero days, and they were now more content to live in the present, appreciating the small joys of life. As the two men sat there, enjoying their coffee, they watched the world go by. A few people walked past, their faces a mix of curiosity and recognition, but none of them approached. For a while, they were left in peace, their conversation wandering from old movie sets to personal stories from their childhoods. Seagal, with his calm demeanor, spoke about his early days training in martial arts. "I started in Aikido, you know," he said. "It was never about becoming famous or being a tough guy. It was about finding peace within yourself, about learning how to control your body and mind. That's the real power." Norris, who had spent years training in karate, nodded thoughtfully. "For me, it was the same. Martial arts is a way of life. It teaches you respect, not just for others, but for yourself as well. People think it's all about fighting, but it's so much more than that. It's discipline, it's mental clarity, and it's learning how to be a better person." Both men spoke with a quiet wisdom, each reflecting on how martial arts had shaped their lives. Their careers in film had followed, but the foundation of their success had been built on the principles they had learned through years of training. It wasn't just the action scenes or the fame that had defined them, it was the lessons they had learned through their discipline, the strength they had developed both physically and mentally. Despite all their years in the public eye, both Seagal and Norris had managed to stay grounded. They hadn't let fame change who they were. And today, sitting at a small cafe, that sense of humility was evident. They weren't the larger-than-life characters people saw on screen, they were simply two friends, enjoying a peaceful moment together, talking about their shared love of martial arts and their lives outside the cameras. "I think that's what people miss," Seagal continued. "They see us as these tough guys in movies, but there's a lot more to us than that. We're not just fighters. We've lived through a lot, and we've learned a lot too. Life's about more than just winning battles, it's about understanding who you are, what you stand for, and how you treat others." Norris smiled, sipping his coffee. "And that's what we've tried to show, in our own way. Through the movies, sure. But also through our actions. We've always tried to lead by example." For a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them, a shared understanding of the journey they had both been on. It was a rare moment of reflection, one that felt as important as any of the action-packed scenes they had filmed over the years. They had both seen and experienced so much, but it was in moments like this, quiet, thoughtful, and simple, that they found the most meaning. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Seagal and Norris finished their drinks. The streets around them were beginning to quiet down, and the day was coming to an end. There was no rush, no need to be anywhere. They were content. "You know," Norris said, standing up and stretching, "this has been one of the strangest days I've had in a long time. But I think it's been one of the best, too." Seagal agreed. Sometimes the best moments are the simplest ones. We don't need all the excitement to enjoy life. Just a walk, a cup of coffee, and good company, that's enough. They walked out of the cafe together, side by side, and as they did, the evening air felt refreshing. The world around them seemed a little more peaceful, a little more grounded. There was no need for dramatic action scenes or larger-than-life moments. They were just two friends walking through life, appreciating the quiet moments that made it all worthwhile. As they strolled down the street, Seagal and Norris talked about their plans for the future. Both men were still involved in martial arts, still active in their communities, and still passionate about helping others. They had spent their careers making movies and being action heroes, but now they were focusing on giving back, on sharing the lessons they had learned over the years. Maybe we should do more of this, Seagal mused, looking around at the peaceful street. Not just the movies, but also spending time in places like this. The world could use a little more calm. Norris laughed. You might be right. There's a lot of noise out there. It's good to take a step back and just breathe. And so, as the evening unfolded, Seagal and Norris walked together, enjoying the simplicity of life and the bond they shared. They had both achieved greatness, but in that moment, greatness wasn't defined by fame or awards. It was defined by the quiet, meaningful conversations they had shared, the wisdom they had passed on, and the peace they had found in each other's company. He officers drove away, still unsure whether they were going to be able to live down the strange encounter. Seagal and Norris continued their walk. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the quiet street. Despite the earlier confusion, they didn't feel upset or frustrated. If anything, they found the situation somewhat amusing. I'll tell you what, Chuck, Seagal said, breaking the silence. I've been in some pretty crazy situations over the years, but I never expected to get stopped like that on a regular stroll. Norris chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's pretty wild. I guess we're so used to being recognized that it's strange when we aren't. Both men had spent decades in the public eye, their faces known across the world as action heroes. Seagal was a martial arts legend, known for his roles in films like Under Siege and Hard to Kill. Norris was the embodiment of toughness, known for his roles in Walker, Texas Ranger, and his famous Chuck Norris facts that had become a part of pop culture. For years, people had admired them, cheered for them, and respected them. They were icons. But today, they had been treated like any other ordinary citizens, questioned by the police as if they were anyone else. The irony wasn't lost on them. As they walked, the conversation shifted from the incident with the police to more personal matters, stories from their careers, funny moments from their pasts, and the many people they had met along the way. They didn't talk about the movies or the stunts they had done, but about the simpler moments, the behind-the-scenes laughter, the friendships they had formed, and the impact their work had on others. The funny thing is, Chuck, Seagal continued, I've spent so much time training people, teaching martial arts, and yet today we got a lesson ourselves. Norris nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yet, it's easy to forget how people perceive us, especially when we've been in the public eye for so long. We get so used to being the heroes that we forget we're just regular guys too. There was a pause as they both reflected on this. It was true, despite all the accolades, the fame, and the recognition, they were just men, like anyone else. They had families, hobbies, and interests that had nothing to do with the characters they played on screen. They were more than just the action heroes everyone admired. They were human, too. The conversation shifted to their shared love of martial arts. Both Seagal and Norris had spent most of their lives honing their skills, not just for their movie roles but for the discipline it brought to their lives. It was a way of life for them, a philosophy that extended far beyond the screen. It had taught them patience, control, and respect, values they carried with them every day, whether they were on set or just walking down the street. I still train every day, Norris said. I've been doing this for so long, it's become second nature. But it's not just about the fighting. It's about the discipline, the control, the mental clarity. That's what martial arts really teaches you. Seagal nodded in agreement. Exactly. It's not about being the toughest guy in the room. It's about understanding yourself, knowing your limits, and pushing yourself to be better every day. They walked on for a while, letting the peaceful rhythm of the day wash over them. There was no rush, no agenda, just two old friends enjoying each other's company and the quiet of the neighborhood. The incident with the police had faded into the background, becoming just another funny story to tell in the years to come. But just as they were starting to settle into the calm, a group of teenagers walked by, and one of them looked up at them, eyes wide with surprise. "Wait a minute," the teenager said. Are you Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal?" Seagal and Norris exchanged a glance, both of them smiling. "We sure are," Norris said, his voice warm. The teenager stopped in his tracks, his friends gathering around him. "No way," he exclaimed. "We grew up watching your movies. You guys are legends." The moment was oddly familiar, but this time, it felt different. Instead of being the heroes who were constantly admired, they were now two older men, sharing a quiet moment with people who had watched them on screen when they were younger. It was a new generation that had grown up with their films, but this encounter was different from the usual adoring fans. Seagal chuckled and said, "Well, we're not exactly the heroes in this neighborhood today." The teenager laughed, clearly aware of the earlier situation with the police. "Yeah, I heard about what happened. I can't believe they didn't recognize you." "Guess we just look like regular guys," Norris said with a smile, "but we're happy to make a few new fans." The teenagers continued to chat with them for a few more minutes, asking about their movies, their favorite fight scenes, and how they felt about their legendary status. Seagal and Norris answered their questions politely, but they also made sure to talk about the importance of staying humble and grounded, regardless of fame. "You know," Seagal said thoughtfully, "the real challenge isn't being a legend. It's being a person who can still make a difference in someone's life. That's what matters more than all the fame and the awards." Norris nodded. "Exactly. Fame comes and goes, but the impact you have on others, that lasts." The teenagers seemed to take their words to heart, listening intently as the two action stars shared their wisdom. It was a moment of genuine connection, not based on their fame, but on the shared experience of being human. After a few more minutes, the teenagers said their goodbyes and walked away, still talking excitedly about meeting their heroes. Seagal and Norris watched them go, both of them feeling a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't about the admiration, they didn't need that anymore, but it was about knowing that their work had made a lasting impact, even on the younger generation. As the afternoon wore on, Seagal and Norris continued their walk, now with a renewed sense of appreciation for the simple moments. The police incident was behind them, replaced by this unexpected, but meaningful, encounter with the next generation. They didn't need recognition to know their worth. They knew that what they had done, and the lessons they had learned along the way, would stay with them forever. "So, what's next?" Seagal asked, breaking the silence. Norris smiled. "I think it's time for a coffee." And so, they headed toward a nearby cafe, enjoying the calm of the day and the satisfaction of knowing that, despite the mix-up earlier, they had made it through another strange, yet memorable, moment in their lives. The officers wanted, but they had nothing to hide. They both stopped walking and approached the car, with Seagal speaking first. "Just taking a walk," he said in his usual calm voice. As the realization settled in, the awkwardness of the situation hung in the air. The officers, still trying to process what had just happened, began to stammer apologies. They had assumed these two men were just ordinary people walking down the street, but now they were faced with the truth: they had just harassed two of the biggest action stars in Hollywood. "Sorry, Mr. Seagal, Mr. Norris," one of the officers said, his voice a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. "We didn't recognize you at first." Chuck Norris gave him a small nod, showing no sign of anger. "It's all right," he said in his calm, steady voice. There was no malice in his tone, just a simple understanding. He had been in far more dangerous situations than this, and a simple misunderstanding with a couple of cops was not going to shake him. Seagal, too, remained calm. He wasn't upset, though the situation had definitely caught him off guard. He had dealt with much worse, but it was strange to be treated like a suspect when, in reality, he was just a man trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon walk. "We just wanted to take a stroll," he said, his voice still calm but with a hint of amusement. The officers, realizing their mistake, began to apologize more sincerely. They had been trained to be cautious, especially when dealing with strangers, but they had taken things too far. They had assumed these men were suspicious, when in fact, they were some of the most famous and respected figures in the world. "I can't believe this," one of the officers muttered under his breath. "We just stopped Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. How did we not recognize you?" Seagal smiled slightly, trying to ease the tension. "It happens. I guess not everyone watches action movies." Norris, ever the humble one, added, "We're just regular people, trying to enjoy the day like anyone else." The two officers looked at each other, still processing the situation. It was a surreal moment, one that neither of them would ever forget. They had spent years enforcing the law, dealing with criminals and suspects, but now they had accidentally stumbled into an encounter with two of the most famous action stars in the world. The officers finally managed to regain their composure. They took a step back, giving Seagal and Norris a little more space. "We didn't mean any disrespect," one of the officers said. "We were just doing our job." "We understand," Seagal replied, his tone reassuring. "No harm done." Norris nodded in agreement. "Just next time, maybe check who you're talking to before you start questioning them." The officers, still a little embarrassed, nodded. They had learned a valuable lesson that day: never jump to conclusions without having all the facts. They had assumed these two men were just another pair of people causing trouble, when in reality, they had been standing face to face with two legends. Seagal and Norris shared a quick look, both of them silently acknowledging the irony of the situation. They had spent their entire careers in the spotlight, often surrounded by fans and admiration. But today, they had been treated like anyone else, questioned and harassed by the very people who were supposed to protect and serve. But even in the face of such a misunderstanding, Seagal and Norris were unfazed. They had faced far worse in their careers both on and off the screen. They had dealt with dangerous criminals, life-threatening situations, and countless battles, but this was just another story to add to their growing collection of bizarre and humorous tales. The officers, realizing they had crossed a line, began to apologize again, offering to make it right. "Is there anything we can do to make this up to you?" one of the officers asked. Seagal shook his head. "It's fine. No harm done." Norris agreed. "We're not looking for anything in return. Just doing our part to keep things peaceful." The officers, now more at ease, gave a final apology and started to drive away. But before they could go, Seagal called out to them. "Hey," he said, his voice light-hearted. "Next time, maybe we can have a friendly chat about martial arts instead of all this questioning." The officers, now laughing a little, waved and drove off, realizing they had just experienced something that most people would never believe. They had spent the better part of their careers dealing with criminals and suspects, but today, they had encountered two of the biggest action stars in the world, and they had no idea who they were until it was too late. As Seagal and Norris resumed their walk, the streets felt a little quieter than before. The incident had left a strange sense of irony in the air. They had been harassed, questioned, and treated like criminals for a brief moment. Yet, they had handled the situation with grace and humor, never once losing their composure. Norris, always the philosophical one, spoke first. "You know, it's funny. After all the things we've done in our careers, something as simple as this still catches us off guard." Seagal chuckled softly. "Yet, who would have thought? We're used to facing villains, not police officers who don't recognize us." They both laughed, their steps light and easy as they continued down the street. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood. It was the kind of day that, in another life, would have been perfect for just sitting back and relaxing. But instead, they were now part of a funny and unexpected story, one they would surely tell for years to come. As they walked, neither of them dwelled on the incident. They had moved on, just as they always did. The world may not always recognize them, but that didn't change who they were. And today, they had shown that even in the face of a misunderstanding, they could remain calm, collected, and never lose their sense of humor. It wasn't the first time Seagal and Norris had found themselves in strange situations, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. They had both spent their careers navigating dangerous paths, facing obstacles that many people could never even imagine. But they had always come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and more prepared for whatever the world threw at them. And so, as the officers drove away, Seagal and Norris simply continued their walk. There was no need to look back. They had faced down a misunderstanding, handled it with grace, and moved forward just like they always did. The officers eyed them suspiciously. "You're out here, in this part of town, with no clear reason?" the second officer asked. The tone wasn't friendly, and it was clear that they were already assuming the worst. The officers had likely encountered people walking in the area who didn't belong. Perhaps they thought these two men were up to no good. Seagal didn't flinch. He gave a slight nod, hoping that the situation would be resolved quickly. "We're just passing through," he explained again, his voice steady and composed. Chuck Norris, standing beside him, didn't speak at first. His presence alone often commanded respect, but the officers, having no idea who he was, seemed undeterred. He simply stood with his arms at his sides, his expression calm and neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet strength, a knowledge that he could handle whatever came his way. The officers, still unsure about the two men, asked to see their identification. It was clear now that they were beginning to suspect that something wasn't right. They had no evidence of wrongdoing, but their instincts told them that these men might not be who they said they were. Their skepticism began to show as they became more insistent. Seagal calmly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, while Norris did the same. They handed over their IDs, but the officers didn't seem satisfied. They kept asking more questions, questioning why two older men were in this neighborhood and why they didn't have a clear destination. They even suggested that the two men might have been involved in something illegal, despite there being no evidence at all. Seagal and Norris exchanged another glance, silently acknowledging the absurdity of the situation. They were both used to facing much more dangerous situations than this, but the idea that they were being questioned like this by the police, with no recognition or understanding of who they were, was almost laughable. Still, they remained calm and composed, unwilling to escalate the situation any further. "You guys are acting a little strange," one of the officers said, still not fully convinced. He didn't know it, but his words were about to cause the situation to take a surprising turn. Seagal, never one to let things get too out of hand, decided it was time to clear the air. He glanced over at Norris, who gave a small nod in return. This was the moment when the two men were about to reveal who they really were, though they were still uncertain whether it would make any difference. "Well," Seagal said slowly, "I think you need to check who we really are." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "I'm Steven Seagal." Norris, seeing his cue, added calmly, "And I'm Chuck Norris." For a brief moment, there was silence. The officers stared at them, not quite sure how to react. They had heard the names, of course, but it was hard to imagine that the legends they had seen on TV could be standing in front of them, dressed as ordinary men on a quiet street. There was a flicker of recognition in their eyes, but the realization came too slowly. One of the officers, still unsure, muttered under his breath, "You're kidding, right?" Seagal didn't respond. Instead, he looked the officer in the eyes, showing no sign of frustration, just a quiet confidence. He had been in countless high-pressure situations before, and this one felt like nothing compared to some of the life-or-death moments he had faced. Norris, too, remained calm, his eyes still steady as he observed the officers' reactions. The officers, now realizing that they had made a mistake, started to fumble for words. Their initial hostility quickly melted into embarrassment as they began to apologize, stammering as they explained their misunderstanding. They had no idea who they were dealing with and had jumped to conclusions far too quickly. The tension that had hung in the air moments before dissolved, but there was still an awkwardness to the situation. Seagal and Norris, though gracious, couldn't help but find humor in the absurdity of it all. After all, they were just two action stars enjoying a simple walk, and yet here they were, caught in the middle of a misunderstanding. And so, the story of how two of the world's most famous martial artists were harassed by the police in a quiet neighborhood began. Little did the officers know, this encounter would become a legendary tale of its own, one that would be told and retold for years to come.